here today have done a lot of work, including research and field work in Malibu Creek and Lagoon, and that work has relied on volunteers. Dozens of community scientists devoted their Saturday mornings, regardless of weather, taking careful measurements of algae and dissolved oxygen and flows in the creek and lagoon. They cleaned up trash and they pulled invasive plants, they dug cars out of creek banks, they got dirty, they worked really hard. I remember meeting a group of volunteers here at this very spot and sending teams out all over the watershed to measure dissolved oxygen throughout the wee small hours, and I mean the wee small hours. We measured oxygen in the water every 15 minutes between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. with no greater reward than a coffee and a donut, if you were lucky, in order to understand the condition of the creek and the lagoon for the creatures that live in it. And it was cold and foggy and exhausting, but we learned something important. We learned that dissolved oxygen was nearly zero in those old lagoon channels that were here for much of the night, and that the fish and invertebrates could not survive. And that's a big part of the reason for doing this restoration. This place means so much to those volunteers and to thousands of others, and this celebration today is partly for their dedication and love of the lagoon. Thank you to our volunteers. Today we will hear from some of the partners who made this project a reality by bringing leadership, technical expertise, and funding, and from some of our strongest supporters, those who have understood the long-term impacts of this project to sustaining our coastal environment. First, I would like to introduce Suzanne Good. Suzanne is a senior environmental scientist with California State Parks and is undoubtedly one of the most knowledgeable people about the ecology of this lagoon, not to mention among one of its most dedicated supporters. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thanks, Sarah. Well, welcome to Malibu. When this was Malibu, the entire area that's now the Civic Center was a series of interconnected wetlands that were wet during at least part of the year. And it was thus for thousands and thousands of years. The inhabitants who succeeded the Native American Chumash didn't really see the wetlands as quite as valuable, perhaps, as we do today. And the wetlands became filled in for agriculture, for habitation, for commercial business, and later for a Caltrans dump. The area that we're standing in right now and extending throughout our entire project area was buried in about 10 feet of fill and trash.
He supported citizen science and volunteer efforts here and throughout the watershed for decades. Welcome, Mark Gold.
It's amazing this day has finally come. And I really want to bring attention to one person in particular, Mark Abramson, who was just mentioned. I had the pleasure of having Mark be a volunteer at Heal the Bay in the early 90s. He was an accounting graduate from Pepperdine, nearby, and he realized that he just wanted to do more, and habitat restoration really became his life. He was a pain in the ass to manage, I'll tell you that. I know Shelley and I have that in common.
The flows that come out of this creek can get substantial. I mean substantial. And when this thing overflows its banks, or you get scour in between these rocks, they don't have any ability to adjust. When the riprap gets eroded and falls in, and it will.
But at the end of the day, his perseverance, and Suzanne Good in particular, her perseverance.
The first objective that we had was to restore as much of the historic lagoon habitat in
the lagoon area as possible. The lagoon is much smaller than it used to be, and it's being made to handle much more water than it used to in pristine times, or before we brought imported water into the watershed and before the lower Malibu Creek area was developed. And this has created a lot of problems for the ecosystem, not just in terms of public health and water quality, but also with problems of more an environmental nature and habitat nature.
I think those two people in particular symbolize what was needed to make this happen. Today is a new beginning for Malibu Lagoon.
I'm just here to thank all of you that collaborated so well together to make this day a reality. Took a little longer than what we thought would be, but let's come back in 2 years or 5 years and really see and appreciate the great work that is done.
As you start your tour, and I know you're ready to explore, note that we've created places here where visitors will be able to hide in a sandbar willow thicket, stand on top of a high tide, to literally walk on water for a few days each wet season. We have made the cycles of this uniquely seasonal tidal system more visible here, celebrating the intricacies of this magical ecosystem.